The sensational hypothesis was put forward by the Swiss translator of ancient texts Erich von Däniken. He claims that the Old Testament sources contain quite specific information that about 10,000 years ago, the Earth was visited by representatives of an alien civilization. Our ancestors took them for gods and spacecraft for chariots of fire. Of course, this hypothesis seems fantastic, although the conclusions of the Swiss translator, based on the analysis of Old Testament sources, are much more convincing than the arrogant silence of academic science. After all, as you know, she considers ancient texts to be fairy tales. And why would the ancient people be so stubborn? Have you been poring over papyri for centuries, knocking letters on stone to amuse us, descendants, with simple fairy tales? It's hard to believe. But if we assume that they did describe what they saw, then everything acquires both logic and meaning. For example, the revelation of the Old Testament prophet Ezekiel. By the way, a real historical character. What does it say there? Let's remember. And the sky parted, and the gods descended from heaven on a fiery chariot, in clouds of smoke and soot. And now let's ask a simple question. Our God, He's the Holy Spirit. In order for Him to descend from the sky, He does not need a smoking and rumbling aircraft. So who did the prophet Ezekiel describe in his revelations? That's what our historical investigation, called When the Anunnaki Arrived, is about. Archaeologist Michael Tellinger announced a sensational find. Ancient cities that are more than 200,000 years old have been found in Africa. The expert is sure that these are traces of the great Anunnaki Empire. A South African scientist has discovered 3 major megacities, one of which includes the ruins of Great Zimbabwe. Previously, it was believed that these megaliths were erected in the 12th century. But Tellinger is sure that these cities are much older, and people could not have built them. The discovery caused a bombshell effect in the scientific and media communities. It is the analysis of cities showed that they were created by technologies that do not exist today. The Anunnaki have become a real media phenomenon in recent years. They talk about them, write and make films. They are more popular than Mickey Mouse and the X-Men. However, anyone who studies this story has a shocking hypothesis. It wasn't humans who invented the Anunnaki. On the contrary, the Anunnaki invented us. The Anunnaki are the pagan gods of the ancient Sumerians, the first civilization on Earth. The Sumerians, as a people and a civilization, arose 8,000 years ago in the Mesopotamia, a fertile valley between the Tigris and Euphrates. Their city-states were located on the territory of modern Iraq and Syria. In the center of each was a stepped pyramid. The Sumerians were the first in everything. They invented the wheel, the calendar, writing, laws, and medicine. This culture was extremely highly developed. But the strangest thing is that it, like ancient Egypt, did not develop gradually, but as if it came from nowhere. In a ready-made form, the language and nationality of the Sumerians are unique. It is not known from where they came to their land. The Sumerians were not related to the Semitic groups that later became the basis for the Arab and Jewish people. It turns out that an extremely advanced civilization suddenly appeared out of nowhere in the ancient world. The Sumerians sincerely believed that their civilization appeared as a result of some unique event that occurred in ancient times, that they were descendants of ancient people. They believed that these people came here from other planets. This knowledge is striking even today. Michael Tellinger has collected in his museum the most interesting artifacts found in the Anunnaki cities. Among them are sacred stones with perfectly smooth conical holes inside. They could not have been made using primitive tools in the conditions of primitive African society. But what could they be used for? The scientist has a bold assumption. We find hundreds of such high-tech items in South Africa. They were used as a frequency converter. If a wave of a certain frequency enters from one side, then it exits from the opposite side with a changed frequency. Today, the telecommunications satellite industry uses special tubes for this. a frequency converter 200,000 years ago, or at least 8,000. It seems impossible. But even more incredible is this artifact, which is stored in the Berlin Historical Museum. Sumerian cylindrical seal of the 3rd century BC. Such seals confirmed the authorship and authenticity of the document. It depicts the god Enlil, and next to is a diagram of the solar system, as the Sumerians knew it. But there are one more planets than we know. One of the planets was called Nibiru by the Sumerians. Yes, the Sumerians knew what stars and planets were and conducted accurate astronomical observations. It is unclear yet, the truth is on what and why. It was an indisputable fact for the ancient people that Nibiru was inhabited by gods, Anunnaki and Nephilim, who created people. 15 years ago, the term Anunnaki was known only to a narrow circle of researchers of the mythologies of the ancient peoples of the Middle East. The pioneer father of the Anunnaki for the mass consciousness was Zecharia Sitchin, an American writer who was born in Baku and grew up in Palestine, where he immersed himself in the history of the Middle East and studied Sumerian cuneiform. Classical science does not answer the question of the origin of the Sumerians. It is completely unclear where they came from, and even more unclear why they suddenly disappeared. This follows from the contents of thousands of clay tablets that were found during the excavations of Uruk, Nineveh, Napura, and other ancient cities of Mesopotamia. In fact, more than 1.5 million of these tablets have been discovered today. These tablets contain a very huge, such a huge amount of information about the state, about the worldview. There are even lists of medicines, lists of animals, minerals, and information about ships that existed. There are up to 105 of them, and there was an encyclopedia of geography of that time, of that life. And most importantly, life is described, and the epic. The knowledge gained allowed Sitchin to read and retranslate ancient Sumerian texts. They are usually dedicated to the mysterious Anunnaki, legendary gods. As it is written in the tablets, they descended from heaven and gave people knowledge. The very word Anunnaki, this translates from Sumerian. These are the 50 who came down from heaven. That is, the first 50 astronauts, let's call them that, descended from heaven to earth. And then the story of Sumer begins. Many scientists talked about the fact that someone flew to Earth even before Sitchin. This is evidenced by numerous rock paintings of humanoid creatures in spacesuits, frescoes depicting rockets, aircraft, statuettes of astronauts. If we take, for example, the Mayan Chechen temple, there are clearly depicted people in spacesuits. That is, a person with all his rich imagination would never have been able to draw an alien in headphones, glasses, in a spacesuit. With a zipper, and behind him there was an aircraft, and an individual aircraft. Zahai Sitchin tried to translate and comprehend ancient texts from the standpoint of knowledge of the 20th century. And there was a sensation waiting for him in every story. One by one, he writes a series of books in which he convincingly speaks not only about the visit of aliens from outer space to Earth, but in detail, on the basis of Sumerian translations, he explains in detail who, when, from where, and why came to Earth. But what did the Anunnaki want here? Then, unlike the current situation on Earth, there were a lot of minerals, and their resources in minerals, and the aliens from Nibiru were in a hurry to replenish. First of all, they needed gold. Why? because it was from this metal, from this precious fossil, that they made protection for their planet, solar protection. By the way, even now gold parts are used to protect spaceships. The Anunnaki arrived regularly, but these intervals were set, according to Sitchin, by the periodicity of the approach of the planet Nibiru to Earth. As he understood it, Nibiru. This is the supposed 12th planet, which rotates not in the same plane as all the others, but in a highly elongated elliptical orbit, with a period of 3,600 years. And every 3,600 years, the Anunnaki reappeared on Earth to replenish their reserves of gold. Another 3,600 years passed, and they appeared again. In other words, this periodicity was permanent. They appeared exactly on schedule, according to the Sumerian texts that were found, and according to the translations made by linguists. It is a strange coincidence, but all the pagan deities of the Middle East, Jewish, Egyptian, Sumerian, accepted sacrifices in the form of gold bars. Archaeologists have found evidence that gold was mined between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers as early as the 6th millennium BC. Why was it necessary for people who barely mastered the wheel? And where did tons of this gold go? According to Zachary Sitchin, the Anunnaki needed gold not only to save the atmosphere of their planet, but also to maintain almost eternal life in the Anunnaki themselves. After all, they wanted to live forever, and it seems that they succeeded. The lifespan of an Anunnaki, the average duration, was 360,000 years. To be honest, when I met with such facts, I was somewhat discouraged. Perhaps there are different living conditions on Nibiru. Perhaps there are completely different biological conditions. But how could they, having arrived from their planet, live on Earth for such an amount of time? And this figure is reflected in Sumerian texts, 360,000 years. To be honest, this fact confused me. Recently, historians have found out that the Egyptian pharaohs, whom many scientists consider to be the direct heirs of the Sumerian Anunnaki, had a curious habit: sleep in gold masks and rub gold dust before going out to the people. Moreover, it is possible that the rulers of the Nile even used gold for food. Biochemist Olga Listopad believes that white cones are in the hands of gods and pharaohs in frescoes. This is the royal bread, the so-called fine gold.
Why white bread? Because in order for gold to have a rejuvenating effect, it must be finely dispersed, very finely dispersed. Practically, it will be nanoparticles, probably, and fine gold has such a light reflection coefficient that it looks almost white.
However, did ancient Egypt already know how to produce nanogold? This idea is confirmed by another intriguing discovery. The Egyptian authorities ordered English chemists to analyze gold jewelry from the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun. They wanted to know exactly where this gold was mined on the territory of Egypt in order to look for new deposits there. The test results shocked everyone. It turned out that this gold was so well refined that it is no longer possible to determine the place of its extraction. Moreover, the experts were waiting for a new surprise. Some of the artifacts contained 99% pure gold and only 1% impurities. It was impossible to do this with the help of technologies of that time.
It is impossible to achieve such purity by any method of purification, especially the method that we find in papyri, using some brand there. Such purity can be achieved only by electrolysis, and in no other way. This suggests that electrolysis was known and used in Egypt.
When scientists studied the effect of metals on the human body, an amazing thing turned out. Gold is not only an absolutely neutral metal that does not interact with fabrics in any way. Later it was discovered that gold restores the body and kills all pathogenic microflora in it. It is possible that the Anunnaki knew how to achieve an incredible, by our standards, life expectancy with the help of gold. Let's call it that. The main non-lizards who flew with these expeditions lived in such terms that calculating 10,000 years. But what is surprising, and what is especially interesting, is that the most important gods are Enki and Enlil. And there is also, so to speak, Ninhursag and all the others. They have lived here all this time. They've been in charge here for 250,000 years. And they were here. And it's a very curious fact that they could live with them, let's say, indefinitely. The Anunnaki had to extract some of the ruth almost manually, and it was very hard work. For some unknown reason, they could not or did not want to use the machines. At one point, the Anunnaki got tired of working in the mines themselves. And then it was decided to adapt a suitable creature from the local fauna for these purposes. After all, this is the same mechanism, only biological, and the fuel for it grows all around, Sitchin told at his lectures. And this is the most interesting moment in Sumerian myths. So, one day in Peru, the god Enki and the goddess Ninma got drunk and decided to create a man. Ninma takes a bit of something that can be translated as red earth or life essence and creates as many as 6 beings. And Enki outlines their fate and gives them bread to eat. Then the gods change roles. However, the first copies are unsuccessful. They can't talk, walk, eat, let alone work. The next morning, the gods came to their senses and went to work in earnest. So they created the first normal person, Adapu. Then he was carried out by the goddess Ninhursag, and later women were made. How can all this be translated into modern language? Then there is again evidence in the same Sumerian texts that a group of genetic engineers she took from the planet Nibiru. She took the testes of monkeys, and these testes were inserted into the so-called clay. It is so called in the texts, well, because the ancient people could not name any other material for creation. They did not know that this is genetic engineering.
Она так называется в текстах, потому что другого материала для творения древние люди не могли назвать. Они не знали, что такое генная инженерия.
The first experience was not entirely successful. The hybrid turned out to be infertile, but over time, the Anunnaki modified the person using their own DNA, and simultaneously prescribed at the genetic level the desire for gold, which people cannot get rid of until now. The society enthusiastically picked up the idea that not only people, but also extraterrestrial gods die for metal. What can we say about ordinary mortals, in whom the love for gold was laid down at the genetic level? However, the idea of a man, not a creation of God or the crown of nature, but a slave of Rutakop, did not appeal to many. Sitchin was criticized for translation inaccuracies, for pulling out of context, and artistic exaggeration. But the popularity of his books only grew. In my opinion, this is due to the fact that in his works, he showed the history of the solar system, and all the participants in this cosmic drama, not as some unattainable or incomprehensible gods, but those to whom nothing human is alien. In other words, these characters were and are quite understandable to people. We are not talking about the topic now, as far as it had to do with the truth, whether it was so or not, but what he really did. He introduced, one might say, personally to the reader with the history of our solar system. And that's why his books have become popular. Although, I will not hide that not everyone shares his point of view. And there are a lot of people from science who disagree with some of his translations. So, thanks to Zachariah Sechin, the Anunnaki have recently gained a second life, acquiring a lot of details and details. Historians enthusiastically began to supplement and refine the Sumerian version of Sitchin. But the fact remains. He did something that no one had done before him. He took it out of the dust of centuries, and threw millennia of insanely fascinating Sumerian history into the masses. With alien colonizers, planet collisions, genetic engineering, the secrets of immortality, and other stunning things. This topic has become fashionable precisely because Sechin, being a linguist, did a very important job. He translated ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian texts into language understandable to people, and published books that became available to a wide range of readers. Thanks to this, people were able to learn not only the smallest details from the distant past of the Earth, but even some everyday details about the life of their potential creators. So what did these Anunnaki who lived for hundreds of thousands of years look like? What did you eat? What were you doing? And here different scientists begin to have some differences of opinion, which only fuels everyone's interest. Outwardly, the Anunnaki look the same as us, because we belong to the same anthropological type. Even genetically, we had a certain similarity, and that is why the technologies that the Anunnaki brought to Earth were applied here with a minimum of necessary adaptation. In general, the Anunnaki walked the earth and were clearly made of flesh and blood, as they were great lovers of food and drink. This is how the gastronomic preferences of the Sumerian gods are described at feasts. Cream and milk were plentiful. Barley cakes with butter, guck cakes, sweet cheese, good bread, the best beer, small beans, a lot of good wine. By the way, the Sumerians had to feed their gods daily, bringing an abundant sacrifice of food to the temple. Only the Anunnaki did not eat meat. Gilgamesh is a mythical Sumerian who looks the gods in the face. He must die. The so-called gods, they are aliens, always covered their face with a mask, presumably because they needed a completely different air, with a different oxygen content, without bacteria and viruses, and so on. And people didn't see their faces. However, we do know that they were more or less humanoid. The real historical person is the king of the city-state of Uruk. As stated in the official biography, he was 2/3 god, 1/3 man. The Anunnaki often wove love affairs with people and put their half-blood children at the head of the ancient poles. These gods then united with women. Human women, a person, and, in principle, children were born in them. And the children were the same as all these so-called Nephilim. They were the same as all the other people. Therefore, it can be called so that they looked very similar to a person. But what other qualities did the children of the Anunnaki inherit? One day Gilgamesh wondered if he was immortal. After all, the Anunnaki from the planet Nibiru lived forever. The Sumerian ruler went to ask them about his fate. On Earth, the Anunnaki lived on the far northern island of Tilman. People were not allowed in, with rare exceptions. For example, Utnapishti was honored to live on the island of the immortals. Many thousands of years before Gilgamesh, who built the Ark and survived the flood. Gilgamesh did not get immortality in the Bible because only the gods knew how to live forever, and the half-man no longer exists. People were like their creators. However, not everything is as simple as it seems. After all, in Sumerian tablets one can find mention of several types of Anunnaki. It turns out that the Anunnaki could be different. Their exact images have been preserved in the form of sculptures and bas-reliefs. There is even a Sumerian myth about the Mountain of Heaven. Here, moreover, it tells about two types of Anunnaki: celestial Anunnaki and Anunnaki. They are sometimes called terrestrial or Anunnaki reptilians, in the form of an upright creature of some kind, like with a human gait and a beak in the form of a bird. If we take the traditions of other peoples, for example, Indian, then from the reptilian Anunnaki, we can draw a parallel to the Nagas. The Slavs had snakes, the people of Vivich. There are quite a lot of similar creatures in the myths of the Maya and the Aztecs. In Asia, they were usually called dragons. It is very interesting there that in addition to the celestial Anunnaki, in addition to reptilian or terrestrial Anunnaki, there is also a group of one gods led by Senki. These are some amphibious gods. Amphibians. They are drawn either in the form of a manfish or in the form of a half-man, half-reptile. But that's not all. There are also various interpretations regarding the celestial Anunnaki, the most anthropologically close to us. And first of all, they concern the size. It turns out that the Sumerian gods were much larger than humans. And this immediately becomes clear when looking at the Sumerian bas-reliefs. There is evidence of the appearance of the Anunnaks, that they were of great stature. The growth of males reached up to 5 meters, and the growth of women up to 3 meters. Here the parallel clearly suggests itself with the Atlantans. They, too, were gigantic representatives of the first human civilization. Here a certain connection is caught. But is there any direct evidence of the presence of such large creatures on Earth? Klaus Dohna, Austrian archaeologist, collector of phenomenal finds that do not fit into the usual picture of the world. One of the most unique copies of his collection, fragments of bones of a huge man. This is an absolutely authentic artifact. Its size and dating are indisputable. We found this in Ecuador, a ruined human skeleton. A man 7 meters 60 centimeters tall. This is a human calcaneus. Part of it is chipped off, but no animal, including monkeys, has bones of this kind. And the second part that can be identified is the occipital bone, the lower part of the skull. It looks exactly the same as our people. It differs only in size. It is 5 times larger. If we take into account that people at that time had a height of 150–160 centimeters, then 5 times more is exactly 7.6 meters. These remains were found in Ecuador in 1964. Klaus was able to take some of them with him. When he showed them to experts and doctors, they were very surprised, but confirmed that the bones can only belong to a person. The age of the find is more than 10,000 years. Few people know, but the bones of giants are found all over the world. One whole skeleton has not yet been found. Many finds have been destroyed or hidden. In the documents of conquistador historians, for example, in Quisa du Leon, you can find stories that human skeletons were found on the coast of Esmeralda in Ecuador, which are 5 times larger than we are. And our experts, examining these bones here, came to the conclusion that they are very similar to human bones. But their size is 5 times larger than a modern person. It's unbelievable. And Quisa before Leon described such skeletons 5 times larger than human ones. Klaus Dohna knows where whole skeletons of giants can be found. In the near future, he intends to conduct excavations there, in order to provide mankind with convincing evidence of the existence of a race of giants. American archaeologist David Childers, an adherent of alternative history, agrees that the giants were in fact. He has traveled all over the world in search of traces of ancient civilizations, and believes that it is necessary to take ancient texts more seriously, including the fact that they describe giants. The book of Genesis says that the sons of God descended to people on earth. They were either people of enormous stature or representatives of other worlds. It is often noted that they had a large oblong head. The Bible says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, and they found them attractive. And the Nephilim or Anunnaki took them as their wives. This story is very similar to the stories about how aliens arrive on our planet. They are similar to humans, but at the same time very different from us. They are taller and have elongated heads. They have high technology at their disposal, and they have sexual contact with people. In a sense, we are a hybrid race created by Nephilim, Anunnaki, or ancient people. They created the modern human race, that is, us. In Bolivia, Klaus Dona made another strange burial of people with a height of about 2 meters, 60-80 centimeters. But the most amazing thing is that they have unusual elongated skulls, just as described in the Bible. The fact is that in all of these stories, representatives of the Smithsonian Institution, this largest American scientific organization, appear, well, not in all, but in most, let's say, of these stories. And in most cases, the whole story of the find ends with people discovering something. Yes, it means they declare it. Experts from the Smithsonian Institution appear, the so-called men in black, as they say, but this is as humor. Here, buys this find, or just takes it away, after which traces of it are lost, as they say, in the bowels of this institute. The case reached the US Supreme Court, which demanded to make public all cases of destruction of such bone materials, of which, according to indirect data, there are more than 1,000. It is possible that we will learn a lot of interesting things soon. The Anunnaki could be different, big and small, reptilian. But no matter what size or type they were, the purpose of creating a person was to get a free and unquestioning slave to work in the mines. Over time, this thesis, oddly enough, is no longer strongly disputed by researchers and is perceived as a given. The discrepancies begin in the question, and what exactly did a person extract for the Anunnaki in these mines? Sumerian cuneiform tablets contain several stories about the travels of the goddess and Nana from Mesopotamia to Africa. The route is also approximately indicated. This is how this place called Abzu is described, far beyond the sea. I take 100 meters of water from this place. There is a land of screaming. This is the area where the blue stones cause illness, and where Master Anu carries a silver axe that shines all day. Blue stones that cause illness. What is it? Radioactive ore. The god Enki lived together with Abzu. He looked out for some work and kept the items called me. It is unclear what it is. However, they allowed to build cities and store information. Inanna needed these me urgently, but Enki did not give them. Then Inanna invited Enki to have a beer at his house. The god Enki, having taken on his chest, as we would say, such a rough, became very kind, talkative, receptive. And when Inanna cautiously, so insinuatingly hinted that she would like to receive something as a gift, and take everything you see in front of you, and she stole the casket from him. That's what kind of casket. Interestingly, it looks like Pandora's box very much. It contained all the world's laws and qualities. The goddess loaded these very me onto a heavenly boat and rushed away. It is said that Inanna's boat raced first along the heavenly Euphrates, and then along the earthly one. What can this mean? Well, I think, most likely, it was probably an aircraft. I think so. Because, apparently, which could be driven, including. For example, on this occasion, the Sumerians and the ancient Indian tribes. They have a lot of interesting facts that confirm that, let's say, there were such devices, flying vimans. Sobering up, Enki saw that he had lost his most valuable and sent a chase. But Nana was also prepared. She took control of the celestial chariot, and her servant began to shoot back from the guards of Enki. Today, we would say, a routine espionage operation. But could the ancient people imagine a chase through the air with shootouts? But she, too, was not a Bast Shitova. and she also had servants, she also had her own demons. And a terrible battle ensued. At first, not this rook was captured, then this rook was won back again by her. And so it went on 7 times, until finally the Yankee waved his hand and said, "Well, okay. All right. Well, let people have it." For a long time, this story was unconditionally considered a myth. But recently archaeologists discovered an unexplained anomaly in Africa. In the early 70s, a French company mined uranium, or in the African state of Gabon. It was unexpectedly found that the content of fissionable uranium, 235 samples, is much lower than expected. Then they began to investigate whether this uranium had already been used by someone. And it turned out that the uranium deposit in Okla in Gabon has such outlines, which, taking into account the half-life of uranium, allow us to conclude almost 2 billion years ago, or rather 1,750,000,000 years ago, there were 14 nuclear reactors here. All this has been calculated by physicists with great accuracy. Who could have created a nuclear reactor so many years ago? It would seem that this has nothing to do with the dead Sumerian civilization. However, the root of Inanna coincides with the coordinates of the uranium deposit. And could the Sumerians have come up with the idea that there are blue stones that cause disease if they themselves have never been there? The physicist believes that in order to travel between the stars, it took a lot of energy. And most likely nuclear. Only a controlled thermonuclear reaction would allow us to move such large spaceships over unimaginable distances for us. For a thermonuclear reaction, deuterium and lithium casting are required. Lithium is the most important metal that is needed for a thermonuclear reaction. And that's what they mined on Earth. And they mined it, of course, in different places. At first, they were down to 2 of the mineral, which was located in South Africa, in the area of the Zambezi River. That is, they did it approximately in the places where Michael Fellinger explored his ancient cities. And this confirms that the Anunnaki could actually have been there, and the geography of their settlement on Earth is thus greatly expanding. Now it becomes clear that they lived not only in Mesopotamia, as Sechin initially assumed, but almost all over the Earth, possibly on the territory of Russia. The basic Sumerian myths are dedicated to a global cosmic catastrophe. As it is written, the planet Nibiru was badly damaged. The planet Tiamat shattered into pieces, and everyone who could escaped to the planet Marduk. But the catastrophe partly affected the Earth. Most likely it was the impact of a large asteroid that caused a megatsunami, a global flood. The main locations of the Anunnaki were destroyed. Hyperborea and Atlantis went under the water, and fragmentary information about the cosmic gods reached us only from the surviving Mesopotamia. According to some experts, it was this catastrophe that served as the impetus for the creation of man. Suddenly, the aliens needed a lot of manpower to quickly replenish the lost mineral reserves. It was then that they took up genetic engineering, and before that the Earth was just a laboratory for them, where they were engaged from time to time in observing the evolutionary processes of our world. Then they are here, in fact, conducted experiments, and developed this world here. At some stage, they created a humanoid ape first, and then they created a human. So let's call it this, a man walking straight. As paleontologists tell us today, he was created 2 million years ago. And a reasonable person, according to today. So far, according to today's data, about 200,000 years ago. The creation of a human being became a forced measure, but very effective, pulling a chain of irreversible events. New workers needed to be fed with something, but it was more profitable to teach them to provide for themselves. which was done with the help of new agricultural technologies and crops: wheat, barley, millet, melons, grapes. Around this time, there is a sharp and inexplicable surge in agriculture. According to Vavilev's research in Ethiopia and India, Mesopotamia and Mexico, the number of people has grown rapidly. The necessary amount of fuel was collected, and the Anunnaki once again left the earth, leaving man to himself and going home. Where to? To Navira or somewhere else. After all, there is a version that they arrived on Earth for the last time as a temporary base, because their own planet died in a collision with a large celestial body. Nibiru? This is the ancient name of Mars, and it follows very well from the ancient Sumerian texts and monuments of Mesoamerica, if you read them very carefully. Another thing is that Zechariah Sitchin himself made a certain mistake in his work on ancient texts. This error is associated with a planet that supposedly cycles through the solar system, and this cycle is equal to 3,600 years. The thing is that any person who carefully and impartially analyzes the very sources that Sitchin worked with, then you will make one very important discovery, which is that some giant cosmic body really passed through the solar system, not just commensurate with the size of the Earth, but even more land.
По своим размерам не просто соизмеримое с Землей, но даже больше Земли.
But the whole point is that the texts talk about the passage of the planet, that it passed behind the sun and remained there. And we are talking about the planet Marduk. And this suggests that we, already using certain ancient Sumerian and Akkadian texts, are talking about how this new 12th planet appeared. That she, it turns out, was wound up by someone behind the sun. That's what is behind the planet, which is incorrectly so far today called Nibiru. But this, as well as the constant need for nuclear fuel, means that they arrived not on the planet Nibiru at all, but on spaceships. But the Sumerian chronicles clearly state that it was not Biru who arrived. But there is no contradiction here, because several objects could appear under this name. Here, the word Nibiru is used in two senses. First, there is a planet that revolves around, let's call it stars. And another thing is the ship, which the Sumerians also called Nibiru. Why? Well, let's call it that. In principle, this is natural. Naturally, even for long-distance travelers who go, let's say, and fly from Russia. And therefore, a ship or sailing on some kind of ship and calling the ship Russia is a normal phenomenon. If you fly by plane, the ship is ours, our president is flying, and it is also called Russia. This is not a Russian state, but a Russian plane. The history of the Anunnaki. This is an epic saga about a space landing of geologists who, out of boredom or despair, decided to play civilization. And they played so much that they really fell in love with their offspring. This is about the fact that the gods are also people, which means that we will someday become gods for someone. This is a story about universal development and evolution, love and loyalty to cold industrial calculation, and at the same time, a great miracle, the creation of intelligent life, a story that destroys the subconscious human fear that we are alone in the universe.
что мы одиноки во Вселенной.
And the most alluring thing about this story is that it may turn out to be true.